An exceptional step for exceptional circumstances to attempt to resolve what the Prime Minister today finally acknowledged is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. After years of fighting to get their stories heard, the sub-postmasters and post office workers who were abused, traumatised and financially ruined by an arm of the state have galvanised the authorities into action. All post office convictions, with a few interesting exceptions, are going to be quashed. It took a TV drama, but the drama took its power from the presentation of the facts and the emotional truth of just some of the thousands of affected sub-postmasters and post office workers. In this scandal, innocent people were suspended, sacked and pursued through the criminal courts. An IT accounting system which was incapable of adding up was believed over honest, upstanding pillars of their communities. Fujitsu, who made the Horizon IT system, knew it didn't work. Yet as soon as it was rolled out, corporate thugs from the post office started prosecuting helpless people. I picked up this story 13 years ago. A taxi driver told me his pregnant wife had been thrown in prison for a crime she didn't commit. He told me there were more people like him all over the country. Before long, I was reading the seminal 2009 investigation by Computer Weekly, which broke this story, and I was speaking to Alan Bates of the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance. I couldn't understand why this wasn't a huge story. Could it really be true that the post office might be responsible for putting up to 10 people in prison? That, in those days, was unthinkable. I stuck with it, making several broadcast investigations with brilliant BBC journalists and editors. I worked with Private Eye, the Daily Mail, the Times and the Sunday Times. We found out it wasn't just a few people with criminal convictions. Shocking though that was, it was hundreds. I eventually wrote a book about the scandal in the hope that it might give the story the pull it deserved. And then one day, a very bright TV producer told me she was going to turn this scandal into a drama. And here we all are. Now, everyone knows the scale of what happened and can feel for themselves the sheer, enraging injustice. The question is, what happens next? Today's big news was the government recognising that it had to step in, acknowledging that only Parliament could fix an injustice the legal system could have taken up to another decade to make right.
And announce that we will introduce new primary legislation to make sure that those convicted as a result of the Horizon scandal are swiftly exonerated and compensated.
For many of the victims, this won't just clear their names, it's also necessary for them to get compensation in the first place. Payments will run to at least £600,000 each for those wrongly prosecuted, and could be in the millions for the worst cases. Meanwhile, the scandal continues to haunt the former Postal Affairs Minister turned Lib Dem leader, Ed Davey, who's facing calls for his resignation.
This is the same Liberal Democrat leader who in the past has called for the resignation of over 30 prominent people in this country who have made mistakes in their job. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that the leader of the Lib Dem should take his own advice and start by clearing his desk, clear his diary and clear off?
Now, I'm joined here in the studio by Janet Skinner, a former post office manager who was wrongly convicted and imprisoned due to the Horizon scandal. Also with us are The Sun's deputy political editor, Ryan Sabey, and legal commentator, Joshua Rosenberg. Welcome all. Thank you all very much for coming into the studio. Janet, I want to start with you. What has it been like since that drama first went out on Monday last to where you are now?
Up until, I think, Thursday, it was still relatively quiet. And then Friday, it's just gone absolutely crazy. I think the power of social media has helped push it.
Oh, right. OK.
I think that's got a lot to do with it, because obviously people can share stories and it's instantly, you're not having to wait for it to be published.
I mean, I've been hearing from the producers of the drama who are cock-a-hoot with not just the overnight viewing figures that they got first time round, but the amount of streams and downloads that it's been getting on ITV.
Because everybody's passing on
They're
the
talking
story.
about it, aren't they? So which suggests it's really resonated. So when did you know something big was happening?
What do you mean?
In terms of the way the nation had got behind this programme?
To be honest, it was a social media website sites that you go on, and because of the amount of traction that it was receiving and the amount of comments that you're getting back on it, and people sharing stories, and then on Friday it just went crazy. Everybody wants to talk to you and everybody wants to speak about it.
Well, rightly so, because your story is worse than most, and I know that you've been sharing it a lot, and I think we first had a conversation more than 10 years ago when you were terrified. I remember taking your call. I was standing on Reading Station, and what you told me made my blood run cold. Can I take you to the well one more time? What happened to you? You were told to go on. Take me through. Take me to the point where you had a missing money in your accounts. So, and they told you had to plead guilty to false accounting?
No, so I had a shortage of 59,000 in May 2006. I was suspended on the spot.
So your computer system said you should have £59,000 in the safe.
That's what they audited.
Which you didn't have.
Yes.
And so they just thought, right, that's theft.
That's it, that's theft. So then I was interviewed the following day, and they basically just wanted to know what I'd done with the money. I think they was more interested about what I'd done with the money than anything else. And if it wasn't me, then it could have been a member of staff. They didn't look for any other reason other than theft.
Did you point to the computer at any stage? Did you say, look, I don't know why these figures are coming up?
When my first shortage was like £7,000, and I actually said, you know, I thought there was a problem with the system, and I thought it would come back, and it didn't. It just doubled, and it just literally, I ended up burying my head in the sand, and it just went out of control. So I was suspended in 2006, and I was sent to, attended a magistrate's court. Carl Turner was my legal representation at the time.
The MP?
Yeah, and they offered him a plea bargain. If I pleaded guilty to the false accounting, they would drop the theft. And his advice was, you know, it would prevent me from getting a custodial sentence, which is what I did. I took his advice, didn't want to go to prison. I had 2 kids at home. There was 2 teenagers, you know. I was supposed to be showing them how you're supposed to act in society, not like breaking the law or whatever. And so I did. That's what I did. And then in 2nd February 2007, I was given a 9-month custodial prison sentence.
And what, you got taken down from the dock?
Yeah,
to a prison van?
So, the only thing I sort of really remember about that day is going to the court, and when they said custodial, I actually thought it was going to say suspended and it was just going to go, but the door locked, and I heard the door lock, and then to be honest, I just fell to pieces.
And then you're being taken to prison, knowing that you didn't commit the crime which you've pleaded guilty. Your head must have been all over the place. What happened when you got to prison?
So when I got handcuffed and taken into a van, and then when I got there, I had to go behind the curtain, and I had to strip from the bottom waist down, and I had to squat and put a mirror there to see if you're carrying anything. It was not a nice thing to have to go through.
That level of humiliation, how did you cope with it when you were inside? How did you deal with it?
To be honest, you have to learn to adapt to it. You've got no choice. I mean, nobody believed that I was innocent. It's that same old saying, no smoke without fire. And trying to plead your innocence is just an impossibility. I mean, we was up against a trusted brand, and that's who the post office were. There was this trusted brand. And on my charge sheet, when you look at it, when I was presented to court, it was Janet Skinner versus the Queen. You just don't stand any chance whatsoever. And
I remember the Court of Appeal judges and Joe Hamilton outside court saying that the postmasters have been steamrolled and in their hundreds, and it's extraordinary. And I pay tribute to you for your stoicism and strength, because if you want to read about Janet's story, there is so much more that happened to her after she got out of prison, which was, again, entirely not her fault. Pressured on her by the post office, where they went,
a year later,
put a warrant out for your arrest to chase down debts.
Stuck me in cells for a full day, told me I was looking at a 5-year prison sentence.
You had a full physical collapse, didn't you? You broke down, told she would never walk again. I mean, it's an appalling story, and I'm sorry that we don't have enough time to go into it, but I'm very, very grateful. Ryan, I want to bring you in on this, because the speed at which this public anger has snowballed at what happened to Janet and what happened to so many people like her. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Not particularly. I think this has just caught the imagination, not only of the nation, but everyone in Parliament. It's all the MPs and peers that you speak to. It's all they've spoken about all week. It's just absolutely, as I say, caught their imagination. And that is why Rishi Sunak had to act at a breakneck speed. There was speculation over the weekend that there could be this blanket exoneration, and he's just realised that he's got to capture some of this and actually act. And that's why he's come up with this mechanism, what he thinks will work, within weeks.
It's a little bit unsavoury, isn't it? Seeing all these politicians suddenly get the message and then suddenly start turning on each other. I mean, Ed Davey may have questions to answer, but you do wonder whether there's an ulterior motive. Let's try and squash his electoral prospects flat, and let's try and win as many votes as possible by not messing this up.
That's right. You can see there's been a letter where Pat McFadden, the Labour MP and the shadow minister, was kind of implicated and caught up in the scandal. That came out a day or so ago. So that's just the Conservatives or Lib Dems trying to pile pressure on Labour to try and drag them into the scandal. You've got Sir Keir Starmer tonight. When he was Director of Public Prosecutions, the Crown Prosecution looked over several cases. Labour very keen tonight to distance themselves and say he just wasn't part of any of those cases, and none of those cases actually passed his desk.
No, but in 2014, I wrote him an email asking him to take an interest in the Post Office scandal, and he wrote back to me saying he was too busy trying to get elected.
Right, there we go.
I'm still hunting for that email because that's going to be front page news if I can find it. But the point is, every political party has culpability in this scandal. Labour rolled it out. It was a Tory PFI project. Labour were in government for the majority of the prosecutions. Then you had the Lib Dems in charge when the cover-up started. And then you had a procession of Post Office ministers under a Conservative administration that did nothing. But let's just park the politics for just a moment, because it is a momentous day when you get a Prime Minister standing up and saying we're going to try and quash all these convictions without going through the
It's more than he said last week, because that's not what he said on Friday.
No, they're changing their tune. They're reacting to public events on the fly. It shows the power of the media. Joshua Rosenberg, before we get into the constitutional issues that this raises, just something that Janet Skinner said. She was plea bargained. The Post Office said to her, we'll drop the theft charge if you plead guilty to false accounting, so they can get a quick and dirty prosecution without a trial. As a legal commentator, is this normal? Is this right?
It does happen. It's certainly not principled, and the real problem is that you can never be sure in this country, in this jurisdiction, that you're going to avoid prison. In the United States, where prosecutors do have the power to do real plea bargains, they can say, we'll tell the judge this person has pleaded guilty to this lesser offence. Often they put pressure on people to plead guilty to a lesser offence because they can't prove the more serious offence, and we'll guarantee that you won't go to prison. There can be no guarantee, although judges may give an indication, that somebody who pleads guilty to a lesser offence will not get a custodial sentence.
It's really interesting. I know there's been severe criticism of that attitude, and poor old Janet was on the receiving end of it in a terrible way. Let's talk about the issues that you may have with this blanket announcement of the quashing of convictions. You wrote a fantastic blog, which I'm addicted to, very clear-eyed, precise and dispassionate legal blog. And you've been impeccably dispassionate about this, because there are raging passions. What are your issues, if any, about the way that the government is seeking to approach this scandal?
I'm not concerned about the judiciary. I think the government was very worried that it was going to upset the judges by taking the power away from them. The judges' position is pretty clear. If Parliament passes legislation, the judges will put it into effect. Judges in this country can't overturn legislation passed by Parliament. So if that's what Parliament decides, the judges will go along with it. Certainly, the judges wouldn't have changed the rules under which they decide that somebody is guilty, the conviction in the past should be upheld. But if you take the whole system away from them, they're fine. But, and this is the big problem, and it was hinted at by Sir Bob Neill, chair of the Justice Committee in the Commons at lunchtime today, he didn't actually oppose what the government was doing, but he raised concerns about it because, as Kevin Hollinrake, the Post Office Minister, freely admitted, some guilty people are going to be acquitted. And if they apply for compensation and say they didn't commit the crime, they will get compensation. Now, is this a price to pay for being able to clear everybody? That's the political question the government faced, and we know what the answer is.
Yeah, they're going to have to sign something saying they're not guilty, which may not be worth the piece of paper it's written on. Janet, you are shaking your head at this idea that there is a possibility that guilty people are going to slip through the net.
They are going to slip through the net, I think.
Well, how does that make you feel then?
Because I think that because of the fight that we had to actually get it from the CCRC to the Court of Appeal. We've had to fight and fight. And I just don't think it's fair that some people are going to actually get that pass of where they've actually committed a crime and they actually become rewarded for it. And I think that's unfair.
But let me turn this on its head. I went to Wendy Cousins' house. She sadly passed away. She was one of the 3 people whose convictions was upheld by the Court of Appeal. But the Court of Appeal upheld it on the basis that Horizon IT evidence was not essential to her prosecution. And what Kevin Hollinrake said in the House of Commons today was that actually what has come to light since that seminal Court of Appeal judgment in 2021 was that it wasn't just the IT that was shot, it was the inept prosecution and sometimes malevolent investigators who weren't capable of actually investigating their way out of a paper bag and put together shoddy cases across the board. And they did reference the fact that there are some people whose convictions have been upheld by the Court of Appeal, and now the government is trying to legislate to quash convict. Where does that leave us constitutionally?
But the Post Office are still orchestrating that. They're the ones that contest that appeal. So, I mean, it should be... This is what I'm saying, is the power should be taken away from them completely. They shouldn't hold any power whatsoever, and they do.
Yeah. And that was one of the options that was being discussed, but we didn't hear much about that today.
Well, it needs to be.
Can I get a quick answer
to answer your question, Nick, it is constitutional if Parliament approves it. But the government is in a dilemma. I mean, Kevin Hollinrake said, I'm sure a great many people were wrongly convicted, but I can't tell the House that all those who were prosecuted were innocent, or even that it was a 90 or 80 or 70%. Without going into each individual case, we can't know. And so we're going to get unjust acquittals. That's the risk. And the only way of getting around that is to put all these cases through the courts. That's the dilemma that the minister faced. And he was honest enough to say it is a problem, but, as I say, the decision taken by the government for political reasons, election year, very powerful TV drama, is better to get everybody off, even if some guilty people go free and even if some big guilty people get compensation.
And given I've seen and heard from people whose convictions were upheld, and as far as I can make out, there doesn't seem to be much in the way of evidence. It seems to be it starts to become a knotty question about what guilt and innocence actually is and how close that is to justice and what the courts would decide it is. Ryan, this has been a very exciting time in politics over the last 2 weeks, to see the way that this drama has galvanised politicians to do something. How do you see the next year playing out? Because it's a big election year. Are the parties in danger if they don't play this properly, or is it just too minor a concern in the wider scheme of things?
I think once something captures the public imagination, I think they really have to act very quickly. So the government has said they will bring this legislation within weeks. Now, sometimes when politicians say they'll do things within weeks, that can slip and slip and slip. But I feel like with this, they're really going to have to act very quickly. And I think when all parties are working together, as it were, I think you will see action on it. And the aspiration is that all these convictions will be quashed by the end of the year. So I think that is particularly likely, especially when you don't want this hanging over a political party, in this case the Conservative Party who are in government, when they go to the polls. You know, it will just look bad.
Janet, you wouldn't want to pull up the drawbridge on other people who have been not as strong as you, perhaps, weren't able to come forward, have hidden in shame and silence, and haven't had to fight like you have to get us to. I mean, it was you and your fellow claimants that actually got us into this position where the media were able to make this kind of noise about it through your legal team and your colleagues fighting to get this Seema Misra, Tracy Felstead, all these people who suffered as much as you. You wouldn't want to pull up the drawbridge on other people,
No,
would you?
I'm not saying you have to pull out the drawbridge. I just think that each case should... I'm not saying that you have to scrutinise them, but each case, I think, should still be looked over. Somebody can sit there and read a file. I mean, to be honest, do we really believe what the Post Office are releasing and evidence against people? I mean, because everything that they say is just lies.
I think it's quite interesting today that Kevin Hollinrake at the Dispatch box actually said in a normal year you'd get 5 cases, but when this Horizon case came in, you had 60. You had 60 per year. So the government have just taken that decision to actually give that exoneration across the board. And if once you sign that statement of innocence, now if it turns out that you have stolen or committed fraud,
they can always re-examine.
They can go for the fraud offence as well.
You're nodding, Joshua. I was going to ask you if that washes with you.
Well, it's true, but we're talking about people who are accused of actually committing fraud, and who are signing a piece of paper saying, I didn't commit fraud. Now, can you believe them?
That is where we were into very, very knotty problems. Joshua Rosenberg, thank you so much for coming in. Ryan Clancy, really, really good to see you. We'll be saying goodbye to you and then bringing you back in later.